Welcome back to Reviews with Elaine, because I have opinions. And today's opinions will be about Through a Glass Darkly by Nenia Campbell. Okay, so today's book is one of those that is 110% not for everyone. But I really liked it. So this is a dark vampire romance, and I do need to warn you right up front. This book has violence. Some gore, though not as much as some other books I've read, nor is it as described in detail. It has sexual violence, including the R word. It has addiction, kidnapping, abusive relationships, depression, suicidal ideation, and probably some others that I'm missing in here that I should warn you about. But if you do need to know more thorough content warnings, I know they're available online. But we follow a woman named Bethany in mostly two timelines. It's the week or so leading up to Halloween in 1997 when her best friend slash sometimes lover just disappeared off the face of the planet, and in 2007 when a mysterious man reappears in her life, turning everything she has managed to build in the last decade upside down. His name is James, and she is deeply attracted to him, even while every single one of her senses is telling her that he is dangerous and she needs to run. And she realizes she's not wrong. He is dangerous. But is he the type of dangerous that she's been craving, or is he the type of dangerous that will destroy her? Okay, so there's a lot in this book that I do want to talk about, but there are some things that I'm just not gonna talk about. Mainly the spice scenes. There's a lot of on-page sex in this book, in varying levels of violent, in varying levels of consensual, and I'm not going to talk about it because I don't wanna. Sorry, but you're basically strangers online. I'm not comfortable with telling you what I found hot and what I found a bit of a turnoff. So, I'm just going to leave it at this book is not as smutty as some I have read. I would not quite class it as erotica, but it has significantly more on-page, thoroughly described sex than any other non-erotica book I've ever read. And I will tell you that if you are not the kind of reader who is going to enjoy reading about those various warnings I listed previously, then yeah, you're not going to enjoy the sex scenes in this book. But if you are the type of reader who all of that sounded like, yeah, sure, why not? That sounds fun. This might be the book for you. But I do want to talk about the setting, I want to talk about characters, and I want to talk about psychology, because that's what I found super interesting in this book. First, oh my god, I have never read a book in my entire life that hits the nostalgia for the late 90s so hard and so perfectly on the head. Everything from the casual mention of butterfly clips to the strange mix of shallow optimism and deep ennui. Like, this all felt like it stepped entirely out of 1997. And it did the perfect job, in my opinion, of leaning really heavily into the late 90s set dressing early on when we were building the world and putting us in the right set of mind for the story. And then it majorly lightened up on the references in later chapters. Once the story really started going, the world was established, we didn't need that anymore. It let it go. And I have never been to San Francisco. I believe it's San Francisco, the city this one's set in, but there's just the right amount of world building around the city as well, that it not just gave me the vibes of the city, but also how it changed across the decade that this book spans. And on that note, yet, 2007 is also pretty thoroughly painted, but because it's more recent, it feels a lot less period. Instead, it just felt a bit more like reading a book that happened to have been published in 2007. And I think, once again, the author did a really great job of walking the line of giving us the exact right amount of reminders of what life was like in that era, without feeling like a skit that's making fun of the nostalgia of looking back. And I think that this is actually a really difficult line to walk, especially when it's a relatively recent time period, because it's too easy to forget that life was different in 2007. And I think this book did one of the best jobs I have ever seen of really creating a recent time period novel. And I also loved the way the progression of time really mirrored the progression of our main character's evolution. Just like 1997 had this weird ennui to it, Bethany at that time was this ball of barely functioning depression. And just like 2007 had something of the feeling of seeing the dawning of a new world and being slightly disappointed about how much it looks like the old one. Bethany of 2007 is putting her life together, has built something that looks like a successful life, and almost doesn't notice that she is still miserable. And I loved Bethany. I loved her trauma, I loved her self-sabotaging behavior, I loved her unawareness of her own mental state, I loved her self-hatred and how much of an introvert she is. And I love both we see the parts of her that is trauma-induced staying home, and the parts of her that's just, no, I prefer to stay home. And I love the mix of both. And there were so many things that she thought in this book, moments of passing revelation that felt like home to me. And yeah, most of them felt like home to me when I'm at my worst. Like, a lot of what she thought reminded me of some of the things that I think when I'm at my lowest. But there were also moments that she was relatively mentally stable and mentally healthy, and she was thinking things as like, oh my god, why am I so like this character? And considering what book this is, that's a bit depressing. But yeah, Bethany has problems. And they are problems I love seeing on the page. And I also love the fact that there are still people who loved her even as she is, even if one of them is immensely problematic. But I love the fact that this book is really upfront with us, with letting us know when Bethany's thoughts aren't patterns that are healthy. And like, I really like the fact that sometimes it's really freeing seeing the worst of your thoughts shared with a character in a book. And it just makes it a fascinating character to follow. And also, I just love traumatized characters. Give me characters with a lot of problems, and I am there for them. I like seeing broken people try to make it through life. And I loved getting to see this character grow. I loved getting to see her pull herself out of her worst thoughts. And sometimes, yeah, fall back in, and sometimes end up even worse. But she was constantly trying, and I loved that. She was a character that I couldn't help but root for, and I desperately wanted her to have a happy ending. And I loved seeing her go through it with these trauma moments, like just basically work through the emotions to deal with these really heavy feelings. And I love the honesty that the book had in showing how her earlier trauma put her in a place to be more vulnerable for the future trauma, and at the same time, she was such a resilient character. Like, I know because I follow the author on social media, I will admit it's the entire reason I bought this book. Nenia is like one of the nicest people I've ever met on Threads, and even though I was really wary about reading a dark romance, I wanted to read her book. But because of all that, I know some people have talked about her characters being inactive, lacking in agency, and being passive. And I'm like, what the hell were they talking about? Like, yeah, Bethany can't do much on her own to get out of her situation, but she fights the entire way. That's why her love interest likes her. And, like, yeah, she doesn't kill the baddie in the end, but she fights him. And I think a lot of this book is about that feeling of lack of agency. Both the shitty kind, where you're looking around at your life going, how did I get here and how the hell am I supposed to get out of it? But also the, let's say, interesting kind, when someone you like, who you're attracted to, who you sort of can't help yourself being drawn to, takes charge, and all you have to do is stand there and say yay or nay. And then it cranks all that lack of agency up to the extreme, and it's just really interesting played with throughout the entire book. But the point of this all is it isn't the kind of lack of agency that annoys me in a character, where the characters are just clearly letting the narrative run over them and doesn't seem to actually want to do anything about it. No, this was the kind of lack of agency that has something to say about how life is sometimes too big for us to take the reins on. And then there's James, who is a lot. He's a monster, he's a broken little baby who clearly wants someone to fix him. He's an arrogant fucking asshole, and he's a soft touch. And somehow it all works together. Like, you do feel bad for him, even while incredibly strongly condemning his actions and being like, what the fuck is wrong with you? And it starts so early on. Like, their very first meeting, his dialogue is this perfect mix of him being this callous, uncaring asshole, but also clearly seeing and listening to Bethany in a way that no one else in the entire book up until that point has even come close to doing. And you understand why, beyond the paranormal reasons, that she finds herself drawn to him. And there's a lot about being miserable together being better than being miserable alone, but you can also see and feel how both of them are less miserable together. And so even though, yeah, he's doing bad things, you sort of do want them to be together. And I really love the subtle way it's shown that some of his monstrous behavior is directed, or at least slightly affected, by the amount of time he spent around Grant, who is a lot more possessive, a lot more violent, a lot less empathetic, but a lot of his faults do belong strictly to him. Like, it does not absolve him saying, oh yeah, it was all Grant's influence. No, it is clearly him being a monster, and there's a certain glory in the monster who really is a monster. He's not a vegetarian vampire. He really doesn't have much of any regard for human life. He's the type of character that you would have to revile in real life. But in fiction, he's just fascinating. And I fucking love that. Spoiler alert here. While there is a coming together in the end, yes, even though this is a dark romance, it is a romance. There is a happy ending for the couple, but it's not just a forgiveness of his sins. At least not yet. There's an acknowledgement of the fact that what he has done in this book is unforgivable. But unforgivable is not the end. And this isn't a redemption arc for him. It just sets up a possible redemption arc for him. And I sort of love that, because so often in stories when bad characters are given redemption arcs, they don't feel full enough to me. They feel like the story is just telling us, oh wait, I don't want you to hate this character, so I'm gonna have them apologize and say they had a rough childhood and do one nice thing, and you'll forgive them. And I'm sitting there like, I don't forgive them. That's not enough. And this book sets up all those little details and then says, I still might not forgive you. And saying I love you isn't the automatic, all right, then everything is good now. No, it's just the possible starting place of maybe, possibly, a relationship. And I just found it all really psychologically fascinating. There's a lot of real examination of what childhood trauma does to someone, how two people can trauma bond, how that's not healthy, but it can be a hell of a lot more fun to read about than two healthy people having a healthy relationship. Like, yeah, Bethany and James are a train wreck, but they are a train wreck you can't help but watch. And, like, I just love how much in-depth feeling there is to the psychology. Like, it did feel like the author actually knew what she was talking about with the psychology of these two characters. And yes, it's a romance novel, and yes, some of the moments are having you go, oh, but that's not good. But that's sort of the point here. So yeah, overall, I would say this book is 1000% not for everyone. But I found it fascinating, beautifully written. Like, some of the prose in here actually did make me stop and go, wow, that's lovely. It's emotionally delicious, and it's just fascinating. I think it's time for me to acknowledge that I do like romance novels. They just have to be a bit weird. They need monsters, or action, or magic battles. And I should have realized this years ago, because yeah, I've always loved a good romantic subplot in like a fantasy novel or a sci-fi novel, or even just, you know, the rare contemporary novel that I read. But I think ultimately it was internalized misogyny that had me not wanting to acknowledge that I like the girly thing. And well, fuck it. It turns out I like the girly thing, as long as it has teeth.